Welcome to another episode of Thailand Truth Talks, Episode 10, The Phantom Condo, a retiree's nightmare in paradise. The turquoise waves lap at the shore at Jomtien Beach, the morning light painting gold across the condo towers that promise paradise to thousands of Western retirees. But I'm not here to sell you a dream today. I'm here to tell you about a nightmare that's happening right now, in the shadows of these gleaming towers. 6 months ago, a 62-year-old widower from Manchester stood on this exact spot, watching the sunrise and believing he'd found his perfect retirement home. His name was David Mitchell, and he had just transferred £22,000, his entire life savings, for a condo that would never exist. "I've never felt safer about a financial decision," he wrote to his daughter back home. "The agent says all the paperwork is processed. The transfer went through smoothly. I should have the keys by next week." David never got those keys. What he got instead was a masterclass in how sophisticated scammers are targeting Western retirees in Thailand, and why the very qualities that make you a successful retiree back home can make you perfect prey here. This isn't just David's story. It's the story of how a £45 million scam network has been systematically targeting retirees across Pattaya, Bangkok, and Phuket. And if you're watching this video because you're considering retirement in Thailand, you need to hear every single word of what happened to David Mitchell. To understand how David became a victim, you need to understand what makes Western retirees such attractive targets for Thai property scammers. David wasn't naive. He was exactly the kind of careful, methodical person who should have been protected by his own diligence. David Mitchell had done everything right by conventional standards. He'd researched Thailand for 2 years, joined Expat Facebook groups, read forum after forum about the best places to retire. He had his finances in order, a modest but sufficient pension, no debts, and that crucial £22,000 saved specifically for a property deposit. The scammers knew exactly what they were looking for. Single men, recently widowed, between 55 and 70 years old. Men who'd handled their own finances for decades, who trusted their judgment, who weren't used to asking for help. Men who'd done their homework and felt confident in their research. Here's what David posted on a Thai visa forum 3 months before he was scammed. "Done my research, found a reputable agent, checked all the legal requirements, ready to make the move. Any last-minute advice?" Their responses were encouraging. "Sounds like you've got it sorted, mate. Welcome to paradise. You'll love it here." But here's what nobody told David, and what most expat forums don't discuss openly. The scammers read these forums too. They know exactly what language successful retirees use, what concerns they have, what reassurances they need to hear. They're not targeting the naive tourists anymore. They're targeting the careful, prepared retirees. The psychological profile is devastatingly simple. A man who's just lost his wife is looking for a new beginning. He has time to research, money to invest, and a deep need to prove he can still make good decisions on his own. He's proud of his independence, reluctant to burden his adult children, and absolutely determined to make his retirement funds stretch as far as possible. The scammers understand something else crucial. These men are lonely. They're making the biggest financial decision of their retirement years, and they're doing it alone. When a friendly, professional agent takes time to explain every detail, answers every question, and makes them feel like a valued client rather than a burden, that emotional connection becomes part of the hook. David's first meeting with the agent happened in a professional office building. Marble floors, air conditioning, security guards, and a wall of certificates and awards. The agent, who called himself Kun Somchai, had everything David's research told him to look for. Kun Somchai had business cards and embossed logos, a registered company address, and testimonials from previous clients. He spoke excellent English, understood David's concerns about foreign ownership laws, and had ready answers for every question. Most importantly, he didn't pressure David to decide quickly. "Take your time," Kun Somchai had said. "I know this is a big decision. I want you to be completely comfortable." He gave David a folder with property photos, legal documents, and a detailed breakdown of all costs. Everything was professionally printed. Everything looked official. The property itself was perfect for David's needs. A 2-bedroom condo on the 8th floor of a new development, with a view of the sea, but not so high that the elevator rides would be problematic for an aging body. The price was reasonable, not suspiciously cheap, but definitely attractive compared to UK property prices. Here's where the psychology gets really sophisticated. Kun Somchai didn't just sell David a condo. He sold him a lifestyle. He talked about the expat community in the building, the nearby medical facilities, the convenience of having a property manager who spoke English. He addressed every concern David had about aging in a foreign country. But the real genius of the scam was in the documentation. Kun Somchai showed David official government websites explaining foreign ownership laws. He provided translations of every legal document. He even arranged for David to speak with another British retiree who had supposedly bought through the same agency 6 months earlier. That reference call was crucial. David spoke for 20 minutes with John from Yorkshire, who praised Kun Somchai's professionalism and described his own smooth buying experience. John answered every question, shared insider tips about living in Thailand, and even invited David to visit once he'd moved in. John was part of the scam. The phone number routed through a voice-over IP service. The Yorkshire accent was real. John was probably a British expat who'd been recruited or coerced into making reference calls. The scam network was intentional, professional, and absolutely ruthless. The actual financial transfer happened on a Tuesday morning in February. David had been in Thailand for 3 weeks, staying in a modest hotel while he finalized the purchase. He'd visited the property site, met with the building manager, and even had dinner with Kun Somchai's family. The transfer itself was complicated, deliberately so. It wasn't a simple bank-to-bank wire. The money went through multiple accounts, with different amounts going to different recipients. There was a deposit for the developer, a fee for the agent, money for legal services, and a bond for the property management company. Each transfer was explained in detail. The developer needed payment in Thai baht through a local bank. The legal services had to be paid to a separate company that specialized in foreign property purchases. The bond went to an escrow account that would be released once all documentation was complete. David made 5 separate transfers over 3 days, totaling £22,000. Each one was documented with official receipts, confirmation numbers, and detailed explanations of what the money was for. He photographed every receipt, saved every email, and maintained meticulous records. The psychological manipulation was perfect. By splitting the transfers, the scammers made David feel like he was being careful and methodical. Each payment seemed reasonable on its own. There was no single moment where David handed over his life savings. It was a gradual process that felt controlled and professional. The first red flag should have been the urgency that crept in during the final week. Kun Somchai began calling more frequently, emphasizing that the developer needed all payments completed by the end of the month to guarantee the price. There was talk of other interested buyers, possible price increases, and the need to secure David's position. But David was committed now. He'd already transferred most of the money. He'd told his daughter about the purchase, and he'd started planning his new life. The sunk cost fallacy, the psychological tendency to continue investing in something because of previously invested resources, was working against him. The final transfer was the largest, £8,000 for what Kun Somchai called completion fees and final documentation. David hesitated for the first time. The amount seemed high, and he'd already paid what he thought were all the necessary fees. "I'm not comfortable with this," David told Kun Somchai during their final phone call. "I've already paid more than we originally discussed." The agent's response was masterful. "I understand completely, Mr. Mitchell. This is exactly why I prefer working with careful clients like yourself. Let me arrange for you to speak with our legal department directly." The legal department was another actor in the scam, a woman with a crisp British accent who explained that the additional fees were required by new Thai banking regulations for foreign property purchases. She provided case numbers, reference documents, and assured David that this was completely standard. David made the final transfer on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, his entire retirement fund was gone. When David arrived at Kun Somchai's office on Monday morning, he found an empty suite. The furniture was gone. The certificates had been removed from the walls, and there was nothing but carpet indentations where the desks had been. The security guard downstairs spoke no English, but his gestures were clear enough. The office had been cleaned out over the weekend. No forwarding address, no explanation, no trace of the professional operation that had convinced David to part with his life savings. David's first instinct was disbelief. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the company had moved offices. Maybe there was a communication breakdown. Maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding that could be resolved with a few phone calls. The phone number for Kun Somchai went straight to voicemail. The company's website was still active, but the contact forms bounced back undelivered. The legal department's number was disconnected. Even John from Yorkshire was unreachable. It took David 3 days to accept what had happened. 3 days of calling every number he had, visiting every address he'd been given, and trying to convince himself that this couldn't be real. The psychological impact was devastating. Not just the loss of money, but the complete destruction of his judgments and self-confidence. David described the moment of realization in an email to his daughter. I keep thinking there must be something I can do, some way to fix this, but I know it's gone. £22,000, and more than that, my ability to trust my own decisions. I feel like such a fool. The Thai police were sympathetic, but not optimistic. David's case was assigned to a detective who spoke excellent English and had seen dozens of similar complaints. The detective explained that these scams were becoming increasingly sophisticated, with international networks that were difficult to trace and prosecute. The problem, the detective explained, is that these criminals understand psychology better than most police investigators. They don't just take your money, they make you complicit in your own victimization. By the time you realize what's happened, you're embarrassed, ashamed, and reluctant to pursue legal action. The detective was right about the psychology. David initially didn't want to file a formal complaint because he was humiliated by his own gullibility. It took weeks of encouragement from his daughter before he was willing to go public with his story. But going public revealed the true scope of the problem. Within days of David posting his story on Expat forums, 17 other victims came forward. The ages ranged from 58 to 73. The amounts lost from £15,000 to £50,000, and the locations spanned Pattaya, Bangkok, Phuket, and Chiang Mai. The total amount stolen from just these 18 victims was over £500,000. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. The detective estimated that the network David encountered was responsible for stealing at least £2 million from Western retirees over the past 2 years. What I discovered while investigating David's case shocked me. This wasn't a small-time scam run by amateur criminals. This was a sophisticated international operation with connections to organized crime, corrupt officials, and a network of accomplices spanning multiple countries. The fake company that scammed David was registered with the Thai Department of Business Development, but with false documentation. The office lease was paid for with laundered money. The business cards and marketing materials were produced by a legitimate printing company that specialized in corporate identity services. Most disturbing was the revelation that some of the references provided by the scammers were actually previous victims who had been blackmailed or coerced into cooperation. The network would identify vulnerable retirees, scam them, and then use their desperation to recruit them as unwitting accomplices. John from Yorkshire turned out to be a 67-year-old retired teacher who had lost £30,000 to the same network 6 months earlier. He was promised that his money would be returned if he helped recruit new victims by providing positive references. He made over 40 reference calls before realizing he was being used. The international connections were equally disturbing. The money David transferred was quickly moved through accounts in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai before disappearing into cryptocurrency exchanges. The voice over IP phone system was hosted in Eastern Europe, making it nearly impossible to trace. But the most chilling discovery was how the scammers acquired these targets. They weren't randomly approaching retirees. They were using data mining techniques to identify vulnerable individuals through their online activity. Forum posts about retirement planning, Google searches for Thai property laws, Facebook activity in expat groups. All of this information was being harvested and analyzed to create psychological profiles of potential victims. The scammers knew David's financial situation, his family circumstances, and his emotional vulnerabilities, before they even made contact. The investigation also revealed that Thai authorities were aware of the problem but lacked the resources and international cooperation necessary to address it effectively. The criminals operated across multiple jurisdictions, used sophisticated technology, and had sufficient resources to stay ahead of law enforcement efforts. One senior investigator estimated that Western retirees in Thailand lose over £10 million annually to property scams. But fewer than 5% of cases result in arrests or recovery of funds. The criminals have identified a perfect target population: isolated, cash-rich individuals who are reluctant to report fraud due to embarrassment and shame. David's story doesn't end with the loss of his money. The psychological and practical consequences of being scammed have completely derailed his retirement plans and fundamentally changed his relationship with risk, trust, and decision-making. David now lives in a one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Bangkok, far from the beachfront paradise he originally envisioned. His monthly rent is £200. His living expenses are minimal, and he's managed to find part-time work teaching English to supplement his reduced pension. But the financial hardship isn't the worst part. David told me in our most recent conversation that he no longer trusts his own judgment about anything significant. He seeks multiple opinions before making even minor purchases. He's constantly second-guessing himself, and he's developed severe anxiety about any financial decision. Their relationship with his daughter has been strained by the entire experience. While she's been supportive, David feels guilty about the impact on her inheritance and embarrassed about needing her help with basic decisions. The independence he valued so highly has been replaced by a dependence that feels suffocating. David's health has also suffered. The stress of the financial loss, combined with the isolation and shame, has led to depression and anxiety that require medication. His blood pressure is elevated, he's lost weight, and he's developed insomnia that makes every day a struggle. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of David's situation is how it's affected his ability to form new relationships. He's suspicious of everyone, reluctant to trust, and constantly worried that people are trying to take advantage of him. The loneliness that made him vulnerable to the scam has been intensified by his experience. The expat community that David hoped to join has been largely unsympathetic. While some individuals have been helpful, many others have been judgmental, suggesting that David should have known better, or that he was greedy to expect such a good deal. The victim-blaming attitude is exactly what the scammers count on. They know that their victims will be isolated, not just by the financial loss, but by the social stigma of being duped. It's a secondary victimization that prevents people from seeking help and allows the criminals to continue operating. David has attempted to rebuild his life, but the scam has fundamentally changed his relationship with Thailand and with retirement itself. What was supposed to be a new beginning has become a struggle for survival, both financial and psychological. If you're a retiree considering Thailand, or if you're already here, David's story contains crucial lessons that could save you from a similar fate. But these aren't the typical warnings you'll find in guidebooks or government advisories. The first lesson is that sophisticated scammers don't target naive tourists. They target educated, careful, well-researched retirees. If you think your due diligence and careful planning will protect you, you're actually making yourself more vulnerable. Modern property scams in Thailand are designed to exploit the very qualities that make you a successful retiree: your research skills, your methodical approach, your desire to make informed decisions. The criminals have studied what careful retirees do, and they've built their scams to pass every test you're likely to apply. The second lesson is that emotional manipulation is more dangerous than financial incentives. David wasn't seduced by an unrealistic deal. He was seduced by professional treatment, personal attention, and the promise of belonging to a community. If you're recently widowed, divorced, or otherwise isolated, you're particularly vulnerable. The scammers understand loneliness and use it as a weapon. They'll provide the personal attention and emotional support you crave, making it almost impossible to think clearly about the financial decision you're being asked to make. The third lesson is that the internet has made these scams more dangerous, not less. While you can research companies and check references online, the criminals can also research you. Your forum posts, social media activity, and online searches create a detailed profile that scammers can use to target you specifically. Here's what you need to know. If you're considering property investment in Thailand, assume you're being targeted. Assume that any agent who contacts you knows more about your financial situation and emotional vulnerabilities than you realize. Assume that the professional presentation and positive references have been carefully crafted to exploit your specific weaknesses. The practical advice is simple but difficult to follow. Never make any significant financial decision while you're in Thailand. The combination of cultural unfamiliarity, social isolation, and emotional excitement makes it almost impossible to think clearly about complex financial arrangements. If you're serious about buying property in Thailand, go home first. Research the opportunity from your own country, using your own legal and financial advisors. Get independent verification of everything from sources that have no connection to the seller. Most importantly, tell someone you trust about any significant financial decision before you make it. David's daughter would have spotted the red flags immediately if he consulted her before spending the money. The scammers count on your pride, your independence, and your reluctance to appear foolish. David's story is part of a much larger pattern affecting Western retirees throughout Southeast Asia. The criminals who target this population have identified a perfect storm of vulnerability. Aging men with disposable income, social isolation, and psychological needs for respect and belonging. The scams are evolving faster than law enforcement can adapt. What worked to protect retirees 5 years ago is now being used by the criminals to identify and exploit new victims. The traditional advice about checking references and doing research is not just inadequate, it's actively dangerous because it creates a false sense of security. The real tragedy is that these scams are preventable, not through better research or more careful vetting, but through recognition of the psychological vulnerabilities that make all of us susceptible to sophisticated manipulation. The criminals succeed because they understand human nature better than their victims understand themselves. Every month, new victims like David arrive in Thailand with dreams of affordable paradise and comfortable retirement. Some will achieve these dreams. Others will become the next chapter in this ongoing story of exploitation and betrayal. The choice is whether you'll be prepared for the reality of what you're walking into, or whether you'll become another cautionary tale for future retirees to ignore. I'm telling you David's story because the criminals who destroyed his retirement are still operating. They've refined their techniques, expanded their networks, and identified new ways to exploit the growing population of Western retirees in Southeast Asia. They're counting on victim shame, social stigma, and inadequate law enforcement to protect them from consequences. But they're also counting on silence. They need their victims to be too embarrassed to warn others, too isolated to seek help, and too ashamed to demand justice. That's why David's story matters, and why it needs to be shared. If you're planning to retire in Thailand, you need to understand that you're entering an environment where you're seen as a target by sophisticated criminals. Your research, your caution, and your good judgment are not sufficient protection. You need to be paranoid, suspicious, and willing to walk away from any deal that feels too good to be true. Paradise isn't free, and it's not safe. The retirement dream that brings you to Thailand can become a nightmare if you're not prepared for the realities of being a wealthy foreigner in a developing country. Stay smart, stay suspicious, and remember David Mitchell's story, because once you've lost your retirement savings to a scam, paradise looks very different, and the dream of a comfortable retirement can become a struggle for survival that lasts for the rest of your life. Don't let it happen to you.